So welcome, and we are excited to now explore a little bit as to the how of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the third webinar in our series focusing on the why, the now, and the how. We looked into the why is diversity, equity, and inclusion so important in April. And then we looked at the now as a way to assess and understand the current situation in May. And now the final part, well, not the final webinar, but in this series is how can we collectively strategize towards the how, where we'll be looking into how we've been sort of exploring the how as an alliance, and then use the maturity framework to explore that as an approach to drive progress on sort of on a company level. So we'll look at what defines success and how we work with driving progress as an alliance. We of course have defined together the All Aboard Alliance principles, which has been developed together with the diversity study group as the sort of as our approach to driving and securing processes. These are the levers that we are using both as an alliance, but also that we hope are valuable to you on a company side. A little bit of background to the All Aboard Alliance, setting up, working together to bring industry leaders like yourself together to drive progress collectively, and then building on the principles for driving transformational change so that we work faster by learning together and being transparent and open about what the challenges are and how we can build on experiences, not just from within our own companies, but from across the alliance to hopefully also drive change for the industry as a whole. And then finally, we define or see the alliance very much as a platform for industry action and collaborative ways of working together, notably within our two work streams. One on diversity, focus on diversity at sea, the other one focusing on diversifying maritime leadership overall. So we're structured as sort of on, we like to think of it as we're building on two different basis, or sort of an industry sort of an action oriented approach, building on industry experiences which are as framed with in the principles. So the first thing we'll do is look into how have we worked on developing together the how for the All Aboard Alliance. Obviously, we were set up to drive this industry transformation, to make the maritime industry overall more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. So when we first brought together the business sponsors from all of the companies involved, we focused on different needs that we wanted to address as an alliance. So first of all, of course, the global talent shortage, which hasn't only become more sort of stronger and more challenging since we first launched the Alliance in 2022. But we're also building on another important why, which is the strong expectation from industry stakeholders, from regulators, from shareholders, from customers in retail, and from consumers overall. We need to do better in how we treat people within the maritime industry. And finally, we need to become better at working together to increase innovation, We are dealing with multiple challenges. One of them, of course, being decarbonization, but also how to relate to the increasing demands of digitalization and what we are foreseeing as the increasing, of course, automation of the way we operate, both at sea and onshore. So one of the things, or some of the ambitions we have as an alliance is, of course, to attract and retain talent, to improve decision making, to innovate, to better understand. These are the things that diversity can help us do: understand and reflect our client base, our markets, and then overall as a collective to enhance industry reputation, so that increasingly we become a more viewed, not only experienced, but also viewed as an inclusive and attractive industry, just also because it's the right thing to do. And then we'll be looking now into how we've done that in practice with industry leaders, which just to sort of also explain how we have been aiming at achieving transformational change also within the Alliance. So when we first brought together at the inaugural high-level meeting in 2022, in May in Rüschlikon, we had, before the meeting, identified 4 urgent action areas. And you can see them to the left in this model: making a career in maritime more attractive, how can we improve diversity in leadership, addressing the gender imbalance at sea, and ensuring accountability to diversity, equity, inclusion through targets and measures. So, and then what we also had in advance was our vision that you can see in the top right corner, that we want to move towards becoming a sustainable, forward-looking and innovative maritime industry that we can all be proud of. And in order to do that, we need to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations, both across the sector, at sea and onshore. So what we then did was ask the working groups at the high-level meeting to formulate ambition statements for each of the 4 urgent action areas. So for the making a career in maritime more attractive, those of you that were there will remember that the ambition statement then became to make a career in maritime a preferred option for global talent. And then we outlined, so what are the things that we need to then be able to achieve by 2020, that we can begin doing in 2022. What are the things we need to do before 25, and what are then the things we need to do before 2030 in order to get there? So this is not necessarily outlining what we are committed to doing as an alliance, but these are the options that we have, and then we'll continue to adjust as we grow and as we sort of develop as an alliance. When it came to improving diversity in leadership, there was an ambition that we would like to see by 2030 that 30% of our leadership at every level would reflect society. So that was an ambition that came from that. When it came to addressing the gender imbalance at sea, the ambition statement was that 30% of female seafarers per ship, and no more than 70% of one gender, which would require an annual increase of 10% female seafarers year on year from the company baseline. So this was sort of, this was also what drove very much the development of the diversity at sea pilot, but I'll get back to that. And then the 4th ambition statement was that we wanted to create an industry standard for target setting, so that by 2030 we can measure industry-wide impact. So we want diversity, equity, inclusion to be measurable, achievable, and ambitious at the same time. So what then happened after the meeting in 2022, we merged these 4 urgent action areas into the 2 work streams that we now have: diversity at sea and diversifying maritime leadership, who are still looking into what we first developed in 22 as a platform for action and collective drive, how we can work together to improve not only on diversity at sea, but also diversifying maritime leadership. So then that was in 2022. So this was also about ambition setting and defining overall more of a strategy. Then what we did in 2023 was that we experienced that there was some kind of a misalignment or very different approaches or sort of ways of understanding what does diversity mean, what does inclusion mean, what is equity actually, and what is belonging. So at the high-level meeting in Singapore in 23, we deep dived into these 4 different areas and to align on more sort of all over lines definitions. So diversity was, of course, all the ways in which we can be different, and was characterized as the things that are easy to measure. Whereas inclusion was looking at concrete action and behavior. So, and meeting can be inclusive, an organization can be inclusive, but it's all defined by the action and the behavior and the language that happens within the organization. Equity, on the other hand, is more about the policies, the processes, the practices. So this is what we usually see coming out of HR. These are the ways in which we aim at achieving a fair treatment of everyone, no matter who they are and where they come from. Whereas belonging is very much the desired outcome. This is where we hope to be, where everyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, that they will be able to have sort of experience a strong sense of belonging within the organization, and not see or experience that they do not have a fair access to the same things as their colleagues have. So these are also sort of what is helping us make it more concrete. The sort of the actions that we want to take can now be split into these, using the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as frameworks for action, which then brought us up to the high-level meeting in 2024. So this year, where it is much more complex, because now we sort of have a clear definition of what diversity, equity, inclusion means to us. We have goals. We have sort of a fair understanding of where we are right now. So we came to the point where we thought it important to identify who are the stakeholders that we want to engage with, and could we make the principles that we've defined on a company level be applied and used also as an alliance and as an industry. And suddenly it became much more systemic and transformational in the approach that we applied and used. And the ambition now is that, as sort of coming out of 24, that the alliance will sort of focus more and more on the collective, all the things that we can do together that are more industry-based and focused on driving change, not just within companies, but very much also across companies. And one of the really important ways in which we aim to do that is by the continuous development of our maturity framework within the Alliance, that came out of how we sort of learn from each other through benchmarks and through the annual self-assessment. But before getting to that, I'll just quickly run through the way we usually work. We've also revisited this in the previous webinars, but the way we really drive transformational change, or systemic change, as we like to think of it, within the Global Maritime Forum is very much the same as we also do within the Global Alliance, and as we work within the work stream. So using the Diversifying Maritime Leadership work stream as an example, we explored and identified a challenge in that there was not enough diversity, and definitely not equity and inclusive enough in leadership levels. So we're now in the process of collecting data, doing interviews to explore the problem and identify what are the challenges and the pain points that we can then address. Once we've completed this data collection, sort of later this year, we'll be able to work together to co-design possible solutions that cut across companies, and then hopefully work together to pilot solutions and define better standards for how you become a leader in maritime, and how to provide for both sort of diversity and inclusion and equity in leadership, and make sure that the good leaders stay within Maritime. So with this, this is very much also the approach we use for developing the maturity framework, which Christian will now introduce and share how we hope that that can also be a strong force for driving strategic change across the industry. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, as Suzanne says, I've been tasked with the delightful task of trying to take you through how each company can individually address the progression of DEI within their specific company, but also within their different partners that they collaborate with. Before starting this out, it's important to emphasize that we won't go through every step, as Maria Propolaki explained in the first seminar, or the first session of these three on the why, is that every company differs given the patchwork of identities working within. So we are not talking about engines that could potentially be the same across the world. We're talking about individuals coming together in companies, and hence you also all have different obstacles and different challenges to overcome. Hence, it's quite important to understand the now, as we discussed in the second session, as to what are your specific challenges, what are the experiences from your employees and your colleagues in terms of what holds them back from progressing or contributing the most to the company's development, both within DEI, but overall as a company. What I will do is I will take you through each of the different principles in regards to the maturity analysis framework. Suzanne mentioned we developed together with Diversity Study Group a maturity analysis framework that focuses, of course, on the maritime industry, but with the learnings from all industries in terms of what does good look like for DEI, because we of course want to be good as an industry, but we don't want to be good at the maritime industry. We want to be good as an industry in a whole compared to other industries. So that's where you see the different maturity steps. It's reflecting overall progress, not only for the maritime industry. And what we've done this year is basically based on the evidence that each member company submitted. We put them into different boxes as to where are they currently on this maturity journey, again, based on their evidence. We know that some companies are doing more, but they are a bit unsure as to how far they actually are in the progress. So we also hope that this tool will help to inspire companies as to what they can do, but also what is actually important to do. They might be doing a lot of important steps without actually realizing that also further supports the development of a good DEI focus and strategy. So starting with the first principle, which is about accountability, it's about ensuring that there are business sponsors, high-level business sponsors supporting the DEI agenda, but also that there are structures in place in terms of a strategy that supports the DEI and that you have allocated budgets to ensure that this doesn't become an ad hoc project, but also that it won't be deprioritized during volatile periods. And we see this as the strongest principle currently across the different companies. As you can see here, we have 7 in the advancing sector, 14 in developing, and 7 in starting out. I would love to go through all of the different steps. As you can see here, this is the journey basically as to becoming a leading company within DEI. Unfortunately, I don't think we would be able to do that within an hour or perhaps even within the full workday, and I won't hold you that long. So I think what we will do is instead go through some of the challenges that we see within each principle of the maturity analysis. So as we said, this is definitely the strongest principle. Although we still see some companies that lack sort of a strategic approach. They lack that long-term vision as to why we're doing this and how will we get to where we want to be. And in fact, where do we even want to be? So starting out, there is a clear lack of that. Moving in then to the development is where we then see that they actually realize the importance of creating this DEI strategy, but also an action plan in terms of we know we won't get there within half a year. This will take long, and that's also an important step to realize that not everything can be done within a fiscal year. It might take 5 or 10 years because we also speak to behavioral change. We speak about changing mindsets, and it's a long-term challenge for some of the aspects. Some might be easily done, but that's something we can speak to later. Once we start moving into the advancing, it's where we really see it hooking into the organization with a strategic approach linked to the business purpose and implemented by the business. So it's no longer, for example, an HR issue, It's something that cuts across the entire business as a whole, and that there is a clear strategy aligned with other business imperatives as well, to then become mission critical to the company. This is one of the key elements for DEI to actually stick to a company, that it becomes a business imperative aligned with other business imperatives, and that there is an understanding of how this also creates further income, further productivity, and increases the well-being of employees. I see, let me just check the chat. I see we have it. Yes, that's Suzanne keeping an eye on that. Thank you, Suzanne. Again, as Suzanne mentioned, feel free to raise your hand or use the chat and the Q&A function if you have anything. We are sort of blasting through this, but I will invite you. This is part of the insights report. All of this is also in there. So if you do need some inspiration as to how can you further your journey on DEI, have a look, shoot us an email in case it doesn't all make sense. Or again, ask as we go through this. Principle 2. Which is one of the tougher principles. It's about equipping and educating people to understand their role in fostering diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces, meaning basically that it's no longer only the leader's responsibility or the C-suite responsibility or a responsibility of HR. It's about employees understanding how they also affect their teams or their departments or the whole organization in terms of how they speak and how they address other people. And that specifically is focused on the training and the raising of awareness when it comes to the people. How do you as a company ensure that they have the right tools and the right understanding in terms of improving DEI, and takes part and are proud to take part in this journey? As we see here, we have quite a few more in the starting out phase based on the evidence. And one of the main challenges here is about the behavioral change. It becomes oftentimes a generic ad hoc training. It's oftentimes a virtual training that you do potentially during the onboarding of new employees, and you do it once. That's about it. When we see developing companies, they move into more established training sessions. That's not just about raising awareness and that's information sharing, but it's more about high quality and more frequent programs of education for all employees. So it becomes more of a natural thing to do for all employees. Moving into the advancing, where we have for this year only one company residing, is a more sophisticated approach to training, where training are offered on a more frequent matter, but also on a voluntary matter. So there are some mandatory training sessions that all have to go throughout the year, but then also further trainings are offered to those willing to seek that. And it's offered in different ways. So it could be a digital version that you go through. It's a seminar, but it could also be seminars physically in the office where you then take a week or two to focus on specific themes, and getting those different perspectives from the different employees, but potentially having some lived experiences that differs from some of the others. And then moving into the leading is where we try to accelerate progress through learning and development programs that now ensures inclusive behaviors and also really focuses on and emphasizes those different experiences and tries to highlight those within the training, and builds this on data. But also includes not only, for example, for the maritime industry specifically, office employees, but also build bridges across seafarers and office colleagues working on shore. But make sure that there is a culture of inclusion across the different departments and so on, to understand that they come as a collective and it's not the different teams individually against each other. Moving into principle 3. Which is by far the weakest for this year and probably also the toughest nut to crack, is about how the organizations can also create this organizational culture of equity and belonging, where everybody experiences an opportunity to contribute and thrive, but also just feel as if their voice matters. So it links quite heavily to principle 2 in terms of that's how they experience it, whereas this is the opportunities companies give them to live that experience. And it focuses a lot on the behaviors also. How do you allow for them to behave? So if we move into the maturity analysis here, we see that there is a lack of standards. So there are no necessary expectations from companies as to what is right and what is wrong, what is expected for colleagues and employees in terms of ensuring these inclusive behaviors. Moving into the developing with a few more companies, we do see that this behavioral standard begin to emerge. So we're talking zero tolerance policy, but not necessarily as to what happens when somebody steps over that line, or what does it actually include? What does harassment look like in all its facets? Because it's not only about sexual harassment, right? It can be minor microaggressions as well that we speak to here. But what does that in fact look like in your company, given that there are different cultures and so on that comes into play here? Moving into the advancing is where that then becomes acknowledged and rewarded. What is in fact good behavior? And when people show that behavior, how do you reward that? How do you incentivize people to actually stick to that, but also showcase good behavior and lead the way? And that's not only up to leaders, it's again throughout all teams and throughout all ranks, whether at sea or onshore. And then the leading, within which we don't have any companies again this year, at least not based on the evidence, where it becomes a default. If you do not do this, you're simply not living up to the expectations to you as an employee. All are expected across the ranks again to behave in an inclusive manner and understanding the different aspects and experiences from all colleagues across. Yeah, a tough one. We've had quite a few discussions around this specifically as to how do companies in fact do this, given that we have such a global scale of companies with a global inclusion of different colleagues across the world, and that there are so many different cultures and expectation that comes into play. So how do you make sure that you do not go so high to include everybody that you in fact end up not having any expectations towards behavior? Something that's definitely worth exploring as we move forward. In principle 4, which speaks to the data point, we spoke about this also at the last session on the now. How do you capture this relevant data? What is relevant data? And how do you use that moving forward? How do you use it to strategize and build into your different initiatives? And here we definitely see a lack of data points. We mostly see age and nationality and gender as data points, which is fantastic. We have to start somewhere, and they definitely inform some decisions. But that's again, starting out, it's the bare minimum that one has to collect in terms to understand what diversity is within the company. What we would like to see once companies develop is the surveys cut by different diversity groups. So we are able to actually sort across the different ones, but also go beyond gender, gender, age, and nationality. It could go within the specific ranks, and it could become more intersectional. So how does different ethnicities within the different gender groups actually experience working within this specific company? And then have those metrics accessible for informing strategic decisions. Once we start advancing, it becomes a full suite of DEI data, and it becomes not only quantitative data based on nationality and gender and age and so on, and ethnicity and the full scope, but it's also about the lived experience. It's about the interviews and the focus groups, getting people to understand that their experiences matters in terms of ensuring that strategies are framed and set up in a way that moves faster. Because we can't read everything out of numbers. Numbers are extremely important, but it is the stories that move this ahead. And that's also where we get the support. Stories matter more than the numbers alone. And that the different business units are also aware of this, and expectations are set to them to understand, but also focus on ensuring that there are good numbers within their departments, both in terms of the sentiment data, but also, of course, the quantitative data. And then towards the end, it's about the full scope of intersectionality across the business in terms of completely understanding how they all experience and being able to use that data to identify the urgent challenges and where you really need to focus your work to further engage not only the people, but also your company in this in order to improve. Moving to the last principle is about the communication of your commitment and also how you progress both internally and externally. That more practically means that those starting out, they do not communicate on DEI, they do not communicate the value, why they're doing it, or where they even are in this stage. It might be within some regions, some mandatory reporting on this. as to how many women do you have hired in, and so on and so on. But aside from that, there are no communication within DEI. The next step becomes developing, where a company becomes slightly more encouraging and becomes more happy to share internally on what's actually going on, how are they progressing. So there might be some internal communication in newsletters or so, where they actually speak to diversity within the company and how proud they might be because the numbers have increased within a specific section. However, moving into the advancing, we would like to see that there are some specific actions that comes out of this, and that communication are addressing these necessary or obligatory reportings to something that they actually want to focus on and that they feel comfortable sharing internally, and how this has informed policies and what changes has been made within the company, and not only report on the specific data points, but how this is evolving. And then the last one is full transparency, and that's a tough one again. And we acknowledge that communicating externally as well as internally on all data points, on all activities, is hard to do, and there is a lot of risk bound to that. So we again appreciate that this is a transformation that takes time, but we also do experience and see this in the evidence that it does help to progress within DEI. And it's also about sharing the challenges and where things become hard and where you might not have advanced as much as you would like to see, because that builds trust in this process. And that then going back to the data gets more employees to share the narrative, and it gets easier for companies to identify their specific issue areas. So a very quick run through of the maturity analysis framework. Again, it's in the Insight report this year, where you can really deep dive into the issues you have at hand or the challenges you've experienced. If you have anything, you're always welcome to reach out and we can go through it. We can have a discussion around what are some of the things. But yeah, that's a quick run through. Back to you, Susanne.
Thank you, Christian. And sort of this was all different approaches as to how is it that we can drive the change that is so difficult with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some different frameworks that we hope will be useful within companies or within your company and possibly across companies, so that we can sort of accelerate the learning by learning from each other, or accelerate progress. I've noticed that there are no questions in the chat nor in the Q&A, so maybe we just close up and say thank you so much to Christian for taking us through this maturity framework, which will be evolving and will maybe look slightly different for next year. But this is all a process of learning for us, at least, a lot, and hopefully for you as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and let's keep doing our best to make the maritime industry an industry we can all be proud of. Thank you very much.